Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you are a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is MacGregor Magruder, and I had the opportunity to be friends with him for a few years now. And MacGregor, I really asked you to be a part of the podcast today because I know that at least long as I've known you and long since before I knew you, you have lived overseas on full support, but also you raised a good portion of your support actually after you already were living overseas because you had worked in a secular job and then God called you into full-time ministry. And so part of your whole transition was you already living internationally. And so first of all, let me just start with saying, welcome, my friend. I'm glad you're here today.
It's great to be here, Aaron. I appreciate your ministry and what you do. And it is exciting to be able to participate with you and have some conversation.
Yeah, well, I think I have a lot to learn from you, and I think others do as well. So I'm glad you're here. I'll tell you, one of the things that I get to interact with on a frequent basis is just this concept. How does someone who is in a Great Commission-focused ministry raise support when they're already overseas? Meaning they are, they're with their organization and perhaps they've lost a few supporters or their need went up or maybe the exchange rate changed. I'll give you a brief example. One of my nearest and dearest friends, we were in each other's weddings, 24, 25 years ago. His name is Kevin, and he lives in South Africa. And I've heard him mention over the years, because we've been blessed to support them, he's brought up the South African rand and the exchange rate with the dollar. And I've noticed over the years, he's brought that up several times. And finally, just out of sheer just curiosity, I pulled up an exchange rate, like a historical change rate, like over the last 30 years with the rand fluctuation. And I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. that has changed quite a bit, many times over many years and sometimes drastically. And I can see why over a 4-year span, when you had a, nearly double, like a 50% change in the rate, that could change what your needs are. So that's just an example. But again, MacGregor, you've lived overseas for many years now, and I'm sure you've experienced that from I know you used to live in Kenya, and now you're more in the South Pacific. But I bring all that up to say, what does it look like to raise support when you are overseas and you're trying to focus on your ministry? And is that possible? And how is that possible? And what changes have to be made? So I've set up this question a number of different ways. I'm just going to kick it to you and say, hey, man, help us, because you have some wisdom and some experience in this that a lot of people are really wanting.
Sure, Aaron. Yeah, I would definitely say there is a huge amount of factors when it comes to considering what your true support goal is, and that's probably something we should evaluate every year. As a single serving overseas or a family serving overseas. Veteran staff that's been in the field, you are going to see exchange rate fluctuations, the cost of living going up, your family may be growing, therefore, the education is becoming more expensive, feeding teenagers is more expensive than feeding little kids. You might be in a situation, you'd be in a situation where you're being promoted within your ministry, you're growing in responsibility, and therefore you have greater budget requirements in your ministry expense column. You may be now in charge of a whole team and responsible for a big part of that budget. You've got college savings, you've got your own retirement account funding. The closer you get to old age, you start to realize the importance of that and want to get more aggressive in that component. So that's something I would do personally, or I do personally and recommend people do personally, is every year count the cost. I think it's a biblical principle. You just lay it out. You get together with your family, your team members, and you're doing team budget. You're doing personal budget. You're projecting out for the next 12 months and saying, all right, as a family, these are some specific things we're going to need.
That's really practical. I don't know if I've heard that one before, but that seems so simple and practical. Is every single year you look at the exchange rate, look how much groceries have gone up or gone down, and really plan around what your next 12 to maybe even 18 months looks like on a regular basis. Don't just go with, well, we were allotted X dollars to raise back in 2015, and that's never going to change, because it's going to change, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it could be the US dollar gets so strong that your ministry costs actually go down. But it's not like, I'm not saying you're starting from scratch every year. Last year I created a family plan budget and a ministry expense budget. And this year in December, I'll be able to pull that out again, sit down with my wife and say, is this still accurate? Is our rent going to be the same, or our utilities going to be the same? Do we now have 2 kids in college and we only had 1 before? Whatever the changes might be. So it's not like you're reinventing the wheel. It's simply just updating the plan. And your donors are probably doing the same thing. So it's not like some big shock if you're going to make an assessment and say, okay, our ministry goal for our benefits, for our ministry expenses and our personal salary and taxes needs to be X amount. Your donor base is doing the same thing, at least some of them. Yeah. And it's no shock to be able to go back and say, hey, things are changing. Things are progressing. Right. I've got greater responsibility and more expenses.
So you're living overseas and you might be starting to feel that need that your support's not quite right. So I guess the first step would be take an accurate assessment of what your actual needs are, right?
Absolutely. Counting the cost.
Okay.
Biblical principle. You don't build the house until you count the cost, right? Okay. And so we do that. It was just something responsible. We take an assessment. We figure out what our needs are going to be for the next 12 months. Some of your donors are probably annual givers. Some of them may be special projects, interest on the ministry side, and others are monthly. You make a projection on what's going to come in over the next year, assuming you don't have any big losses. You can also count on some people losing. You can also count on losing some of your donors just through regular attrition. Sure. So you could build in, say, okay, just to be conservative, I want to say a 5% or a 10% attrition. So my costs have gone up this much. This year, our support level was X, but let's drop it down 5% just for our planning. And then what your gap is to be raising here at the end of a year between Thanksgiving and Christmas is a vital time. And also looking for recruiting some additional donors or increasing donors.
That's very practical and easy. Just assume you're going to lose 5%. And that doesn't mean you will, and God willing, you won't. But if you have that assumption, that kind of provides some built-in natural insurance of, hey, okay, this is, you get there and, oh, well, we didn't. We have a little extra money we can use for ministry. Or the flip side, you do lose. Maybe you lose 6 or 7%, not just 5%. That's a little bit of an easier pill to swallow than getting it all at once when you've kind of planned for the unforeseen.
Yes, I think it is okay, totally acceptable to have a buffer built into your MPD plan. Okay. I don't think your donors are going to hold that against you in any way. At least that's my personal experience. And maybe it's because I'm a little bit older and most of my support base are people in my age range and older. So it's something that as you mature and as you go through life, you realize you need cushion because accidents are going to happen and unexpected expenses are going to come up. So having a buffer to allow for loss of some donors whose life situations and interests have changed, or because, hey, the motor burned up in the car and that's a big unbudgeted expense.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that just today. I had breakfast with a regular supporter, and I live stateside, but just today I had a breakfast with a supporter who had told me I'll say 2 months ago that he is intended to make we'll just say a substantial increase in his normal support. And obviously on one hand, I've been looking forward to it. But on the other hand, I've learned to not count your chickens before they hatch, so to speak. And I'm glad that I did, because when we got breakfast today, I didn't even bring it up. He started the conversation with, "Man, I have to apologize. We got this huge tax bill we didn't see coming, and I feel just terrible." And I was able to just, to bless him and be graceful and say, "It's okay. I know it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you're not able to do it right now. A couple months from now, I'm sure you'll be fine. You'll be able to do it." "Oh yeah, I'm totally going to." But being able to realize that things like that happen in everybody's life. There's those unforeseen expenses in everybody's life, but that includes our supporters. And sometimes the reality of their situation is going to affect our situation. And so we can plan for it a little bit. So I appreciate your points and all that.
Yeah, thanks for giving that example, Aaron. Specifically, I would like to say this: by having some buffer there, what you had was an opportunity to then love and mentor him. He was feeling bad about making a commitment to you that he can't follow through with right now. This tax bill may have also caused some other stress in his family because of other things they can't now do that they were expecting to do. And you being able to just sit there and show him grace about it and still make it just a fun morning to have coffee and get together, have breakfast, is a huge ministry opportunity. If it were a situation where, they had some major unexpected medical expense, some disastrous family situation, and they're having to cut back on their giving, and you can sit there and not be stressed about it because you have some margin, and be able to love on them and pray for them, and not, receive the news with like, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" But with a, "Bro, how can I just embrace your family?" Man, you've made a partner for life.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Well, let's transition. I think counting the costs on the front side is huge, and a lot of people probably don't do that very well on the front side. So that's a good word of wisdom. But now let's move into that. You're living overseas. You are, let's assume for the sake of this conversation at least, you're a U.S. citizen, or at least you lived in the U.S. a good portion of your life, and your support base is largely from the U.S., but you are living globally. You're living elsewhere, and I'm sure that the same situation would be applicable for certain situations, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to stick to the U.S. So you're living overseas, and you're realizing, hey, there's a gap here. Maybe it's like 5%, but maybe it's like 25%. Is it possible for someone to raise that support from the field? Is that impossible? And I ask you because I've heard different answers to that same question. I won't even get into all the different answers I've had. I want to hear more your perspective. But what goes through your head when you start hearing about people trying to raise support without returning to the geographical location for an extended amount of time as far as where they're from? Or maybe there's some hybrids involved. What are you thinking there?
I think it is absolutely possible. And I'll start on the common, what I hear on the negative side, and then let's move into the positive side of what I believe the truth is. So what you'll often hear is, "Oh, we've been overseas for so long, we don't know anybody anymore. The only people we know are our current supporters. It's too hard to communicate from long distance. Nobody, nobody reads our newsletter." And those sorts of things. And yes, those are probably true statements, right? Your readership on your newsletter is only 30% or something. You've been gone from your home church and your home network for so long that you couldn't really name a huge amount of people outside of your current MPD list. But so yes, those could be true statements, but I don't believe those will win the argument. I think, on the other hand, that the reality is you have a huge advantage over the first-time support raiser. You live in the field, in the kingdom, frontline, doing ministry every day already. You have success stories. You have challenges. You have the stories of where the devil has been fighting you and where you've seen God come through with miraculous opportunity to share the gospel or to plant a church or to do whatever your role is within ministry.
Amen.
You've got a huge list of absolute true stories that shows the years you've invested and the years that people have invested in you are making impact in the kingdom. You have credibility. You've been there. You've done it. You are not speaking from I'm going to, I hope that I will be. These are things that you're saying I have done and I will continue to do, but I need extra financial partnership, and you're going to come alongside me and you're going to make this happen. And I think it is a huge advantage to be able to speak from experience, from longevity, from credibility, from the facts of what you have been doing in the kingdom with God's help. And being able to communicate that back is just the key. You need to be able to, with confidence, go to people and say, it is time for an increase. Or, hey, Joe, man, thank you for being on my team these last 5 years. You know, we've been counting the cost recently. My responsibilities have increased. Whatever the situation is, we are in a deficit and we need to increase our donor support dollars in order to get back to full effect ministry. It may even be a situation where the ministry is telling you, look, until you get back to full support, we have to suspend your work. Well, you know, that's the souls are at stake, right? So you're able to go to Joe and say, Joe, thank you for being with me. You know, I've been gone so long, man. I bet half the church people I don't even know anymore. Is there anybody you can think of, 2, 3, 5 people who you can think of that would love to know more about the ministry we're a part of, that you're a part of through your sending us, and to just introduce me to them, to put in, you know, vouch for me and let me share to them, but you've already done the work because you've introduced me. We just need to grow. Joe, how are things going with your family? Do you think there might be room? Pray with your wife and join us. We'd like to see you increase from, you know, 100 to 150 or 200 to 250, whatever the amount may be, but really have your script together and really have some tangible results to show people and to talk about. Maybe you produce, instead of your original support flyer that just kind of talks about what you're going to do, you list some stuff out, some statistics, some stories, and have that flyer show fruit of people who've already invested in you, and you're offering the opportunity for more people to invest.
I'm going to summarize a few things that you just said there because those are great. One was follow up with people that have been tracking with you for a bit and who might realize that you're a good investment, and follow up with them in a couple of different ways. The first one you mentioned was essentially asking for referrals. Is saying, hey, who do you know that I probably wouldn't know that would maybe want to hear about this thing that we're doing together, because God's changing lives, and let's keep changing lives together. But who else do you know? So that was one thing. That's a great idea, is even from overseas, reaching out to people that are on your team that you've been trying to stay in touch with and praying for and all that. If you've been doing that work, it's not that big of a deal to reach out to them and ask for referrals. I'm not saying it's easy work, but it's not a big deal. And the second thing you said there, though, was to go back to people that are partnering with you and essentially say, hey, because I'm a good investment, I mean, you're not going to probably want to use those terms exactly, but because this is a good investment, would you continue to invest, but also would you consider investing more? Because look at what God's doing. The need is growing, but also the vision is growing, and you're a part of this. Would you like to give more? And that's I tell you, Mac, that's something that people sometimes, they're really scared to ask that question, because their concern is, man, is someone going to judge me as being, not thankful for what they're already giving? Or are they going to see me as someone who's just, just demanding, more and more and more and more and more, instead of being thankful for what I got? And so they're just going to cut me off. I've heard different variations of people being concerned about that, but for the most part, that's probably not the reaction that you've been able to receive when you personally ask for more, is it?
It's absolutely not the reaction. And I think, though, it's important that you have been laying the foundation. So you have people who sent you out to begin with, and you have people that maybe have joined your team since you went out. Are you regularly communicating? Are you doing newsletters? If not every month, at least every other month, where they have seen your name. Maybe they're not reading the newsletter. They look at a few pictures and then they close it. But you are not a stranger. Aaron is not a stranger to these folks. And so when Aaron calls and says, hey, things are going great. I'm excited about the future and the opportunities before us, but our needs have increased. In order to continue to do the work we're doing, we need to raise X additional dollars. Could you see a way for your family to join us by increasing X amount, or X amount per month? Or can you connect me with others who would love to know about the ministry we're involved in and that you're involved in, and that would potentially be interested in joining our team? If they haven't heard from Aaron in 2 years, well, that's a hard call, right? But if you're sending Christmas cards, newsletters, sending them a text every once in a while for their birthday, checking in on particular family needs, you've texted with them and know that so-and-so is getting married, and so then 2 months later you follow up and ask how the wedding was and things like that. If you've maintained a communicative relationship with the people who are investing in your ministry, going back to them is an absolute no-brainer.
And that's just it. That word there, it's relationship. Relationship. We've probably said almost ad nauseum in boot camps and on the podcast, a little term I picked up from a buddy of mine named Ed Clark, where he said, I have to stop treating my supporters like ATM machines. They're people. I need to love them and pray for them and build my relationship with them. And he was so passionate when he said it. I've always kind of held on to that, because I was like, yeah, it is. It's a relationship. It's not a distraction from your ministry. It's part of your ministry to continue to build your relationship with your supporters from wherever you are in the world. And yet it's because you have a relationship, it makes that opportunity to ask for an increase just a whole lot easier.
Hey, I just want to take a few seconds to mention something. Outside of the Bible, the book I most frequently recommend to Great Commission-focused leaders is The God Ask by Steve Shadrach. I'm humbled to say that Steve is a friend of mine who actually helped pioneer support-raising solutions. And if you haven't read his book, you're missing out. Instead of going into a support-raising appointment fearing what people might say, you can have confidence that God is superintending the whole process. This book will help you embrace the fact that biblical support raising is not a man ask. No, it's actually a God ask. And it's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
By the way, and you don't have to give us all the numbers exactly, but how often or how frequently, or give us a little bit. You've been in the field for quite a while. Let me ask you it this way. Maybe this is a number you could share. How many people do you feel like over the years you've been able to go back to and ask for an increase, and either they said, yes, I'd love to, but I can't yet, but I will later, or yeah, I can, and let me do it right now. What kind of success have you experienced with that, and have you had any horror stories? Because sometimes people they're assuming the worst is going to happen.
Yeah, I can safely say I've never had a horror story. I have been surprised by people at times, and then I have to check my own spirit. I don't honestly know what's going on behind the scenes in everybody's life. So
Right.
When I ask somebody and they either tell me no or completely drop off the list, I can't know exactly what the reasoning is. And I can't also take it personally unless God's showing me something I did wrong in terms of, man, I don't think you talked to Bill in the last 6 months. And the first time you talked to him, you just asked him for money without even finding out what was going on in his life. You deserve to lose him,
Right. Sure. That makes sense.
So yeah, there's never been a horror story. I have been, like I say, disappointed, but then I have to look inside. The reality is I do this every year. I count the cost every year. I do a projection, and I I look to increase. My family's growing. My ministry responsibilities are growing. That's
Your
true.
son's growing. I saw him. I saw your son twice in 6 months, and he grew in that time. That's for sure.
Yeah, we've got our first rugby game tonight. Looking forward to that. Right after this call, I'm gonna head out there and watch him
Awesome.
move some dirt around. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
What about the positive sides? Give people some hopes. You haven't had any horror stories, but you have had a couple of people where it didn't go over so well, and that's kind of everybody's fear. But that's not been the majority, has it?
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's a rare instance where somebody totally is going to drop you because you've come back for more. And it's not because you've come back for more. It's because you didn't lay the groundwork. You didn't build the credibility. You didn't report to them in a way that they were hoping to see, or something has happened in their own life. And so the fact that they're dropping you is an opportunity for ministry. Yeah. Will you keep in touch with this person and continue to keep them on your newsletter list and reach out to them again in the future just to be friendly? Yeah. Or are you going to cut them off, right? Yeah. You will see people drop off, and then they appreciate the fact that you've kept them on the list, that you've asked them again later on, months later, hey, how can I be praying for you guys? Just wanted to touch base. They come back around. I've had people drop and rejoin because their life situation has changed. The business thing has reversed. Their marital problems have started to change. So on the positive side, it's no end to the positive. People respond. They're excited. They trust you. They're getting asked, within the evangelical church system, they are getting asked regularly. The sheriff's department's calling them. They're getting any number of constant communication of people asking for money. You're a known entity. They see the results from the work that they have invested in with you. And you are saying, I have a greater need than I had before. Do you have it in your capacity to be a part of that? And they're saying, I could either reinvest a greater amount in somebody I trust and know and appreciate, or I can put it somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
They're probably going to go with the horse they know, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes, because they love you and there's that relationship and they see you as a good investment, that actually kind of bonds you a little bit more. I've found that, at least. I definitely have far more good stories than horror stories. And actually, I don't even have any horror stories. I had one family that did kind of gave me some weird excuses. I won't get into all that. I don't want to make fun of them or talk about their situation at all, because that's not my heart. But the excuse they gave me was kind of out of left field as to why they weren't going to raise the support, and they did drop me. And I'm still not fully sure of the situation. They didn't invite me into that. But I continue to love on them, and again, I don't live internationally, but when I would see them now and then, I would communicate. And just recently, they sent in a special gift that was significant. It was significant to what they used to almost give in a year, 3, 4, 5 years ago, because that very thing that you're saying, MacGregor, I didn't cut them off my newsletter list, and I didn't let them know they weren't Christians anymore because they weren't on my monthly team. Like I didn't treat them horribly. It was just, for whatever reason, there was something going on in their personal life where they had chose to back away, and now they've kind of stepped back in. And I'm thankful to have been able to kind of seen that come full circle. And I'm sure that from an international standpoint, you've had people that have been able to walk through some similar sorts of situations. So let's do segue though, and let's talk about new support raising. So you're living overseas. We'll just, for the sake of the situation, say that you're a couple $1,000s a month short of where you need to be. Man, how do you do that? Do you need to kind of move home until it's all done, or do you break it up and maybe there's some trip or some training, or do you just stay in the field and you just accept and swallow the idea that you're going to start out doing all your phone calls and Skyping at midnight? Or like, how do people approach that?
Yeah, I would say if you have a substantial amount to re-raise from the field, where all kinds of new responsibilities come, so you have a new, very large gap in your funding, you have to make a real dedicated attack plan to get your support back up to full funding. And so that will be similar to your experience when you first went out and raised support. I would suggest reading, the God Ask Again or equivalent material to reset your mind, reset your biblical basis of what you're doing, even review, why was I originally called to the field? You want to have that passion, that fire, the biblical understanding of support raising, all of those tools that you used through something like the SRS boot camp. When you originally did it, you're going to need to get your focus lined out. You're going to need to make your list. It could be the list where you're having to ask people for referrals. Who are the list of people on my team that I want to ask for increases and or referrals? And you're going to have to set it up. And you're going to be, one of the things you'll be surprised by is people are surprised to hear from you from 12 hours or 8 hours time zone away. That you took the time to text them, to ask for a call appointment or call them. They're often saying like, wow, man, you're taking the time out of your schedule to call me. Of course, what can we do to help? How can we help you guys? I mean, they're thrilled that they're a part of your team to begin with. Obviously, new people, if you just know, hey, there's a whole list of name storms of people that are in our home church directory who, I prayed about it, looked in the directory, looked at their faces, and God told me to call them. Well, you have to have your script together, and you're going to have to say, you may have seen us in the local church newsletter, or when we came through 2 years ago and spoke at church, we're the Magruder family, and we're serving in X place doing X ministry. And I'm in a situation where I need to increase my support team, and so-and-so suggested I give you a call, or I just, God laid it on my heart to invite you into our ministry, and jump into your pitch and have your script, have your call script, have your text script, your follow-up script. Do the process like you did before. It worked before. Why wouldn't it work again? Right. And the difference, again, like I said earlier, is you've got tangible, real results of the impact that God is allowing you to make in the kingdom that you can tell people about. It's so different, and it's a benefit.
You kind of have unicorn status sometimes when you're reaching out from overseas. There's a lot of people that have never in their life had a phone call from Africa to the United States, much less their
technology. Yeah, technology has totally made a new world. You can easily, like we're having this call 14 time zones apart, we can do the same with our donors. Yeah. And it may be a thing where you decide, look, I need to take a 2, 3, 4 week sabbatical from the field, or my organization, the gap is so big that my organization is requiring it. I have to go back to my home area and do the face-to-face meetings. That could be the case, and maybe that works better for you. You just have to pray it out and decide what you need to do.
Help me out a little bit, because I'm thinking of two different instances. You used to live in Nairobi, and I was blessed to be able to come stay with you in your home there back at that time. And if I recall correctly, there was a guy on the team that you were working with that was actually able to get a bunch of increases through email, which that just kind of floored me. And I'm like, who gets increases from email? But it seemed to work for him. So let me throw this disclaimer out there. I don't necessarily recommend this, but I also can't say this would never work, because here's a guy that it actually worked for. What do you know of his approach and how he handled that?
Yes, I was absolutely, like you, Aaron, I was skeptical. I am a gregarious extrovert who enjoys having conversation with people. And I love to be able to tell them about Jesus, or tell them about the ministry I'm involved with, whatever the case may be, right? This particular guy on our team was much more on the introvert side, and his donors were used to newsletter communication, email communication, and not as much face-to-face communication. So it wasn't out of the ordinary for him to communicate with donors by email or text, right? And just touch base with folks that way. So he made a massive push to increase substantially his support, and did it by email, wasn't going to make a trip home, wasn't going to be doing Skype calls with folks. And, from my perspective, that's not the way I would manage it. I wouldn't think that from my first experience of raising support that it would be effective, but it was incredibly effective for him because it fit his personality, and it was donors he had continually and faithfully communicated with, and they responded in great way.
It wasn't Hail Mary, right? It wasn't the first time he emailed them. He had built a relationship of interacting with a lot of these people via email.
Exactly.
So it wasn't a one-time thing.
These were people that loved him, loved his family, loved the fact that they were serving God's kingdom, and their need sparked a desire, and God put it on their heart to respond. And boom. And it wasn't a woe is me, poverty, oh, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. It was very positive. It talked about the ministry that he's involved in and what vital part he plays, and simply that their circumstances have continued to change, and they found themselves in a bigger financial hole than they would have expected. And people respond huge. Just amazing.
I want to point out again, though, that this is kind of a unique situation. So we don't want to say it's impossible to raise your support or increases from email. However, in this case, this was a relationship that this guy had built over email. And so my concern, Mac, is just that some people would go, oh, okay, I'm just going to send out a bunch of emails and that's going to raise my support. Generally speaking, we have found that that's not really probably the best strategy for most people to find increases. It's going to be more the personal conversation or Skype or whatever else, or the face-to-face stuff. And I was going to ask you, I know that we have a mutual friend named John that used to live in Nairobi with you as well. And I know that they had come into a situation where they needed to, they were doing a move to a different continent, really, a different region. They were still working within the mobilization world, but it would be significant financial change. And what they did is, they did some stuff, I know, using technology, but he actually, short term, would travel by himself and kind of do some sprints. I think he did a couple sprint MPD runs. You might remember the details about that a little bit more. How did he kind of pull that off without leaving his family in the lurch for months on end?
Yeah, John treated it with the importance that it is. In order for him to maintain really great, effective kingdom work, he had to spend a season of sacrifice. His family had to make that sacrifice. And he did some massive amounts of shifting his personal sleep schedule so that he was awake at the same time as the United States, so he could do tons of Skype calls and some real marathon trips back to his sending area in the United States, and packed out his schedule and just worked very hard. And God honored it. His donors rallied around it, and he was able to raise a massive amount towards an increase for the new ministry opportunity that God had put before him.
Yeah,
and
I recall it wasn't just like a few $100 or $1,000. Like he really had to do. I don't remember what it was. Maybe you do, but I want to say it was ballpark $4,000 or $5,000 more monthly was necessary because of the cost of living change with where God was moving them.
Yes, that's accurate. It was a massive change in his budget.
Yeah. And so I guess one of the points would be that there's not a way to do raising support while you're living in the field internationally, and yet it's possible. But being organized, knowing what your needs are is really important. But then also, Mac, I heard you talk about having a script for when you're calling on a church or you're calling on people, and knowing what you're asking of your current supporters, whether that's for an increase or maybe it's for references, or perhaps it's one and then the other, and not trying to convolute that and ask it all at once. But there's an intentionality. It really sounds like time. It sounds like strategy. It sounds like focus. It sounds like time. Anything else that you would throw on there as far as like a big piece that's really necessary?
Yeah, if you have a lot of support to raise, it is not a temporary part-time type thing. I mean, just approach it like you do anything else you're doing in ministry. you're working for God, this opportunity to serve God. In order to do that, you have to increase your support right now. And so put in the time. Do like John did. Make it serious. Set it down. Lock down your time zone and say, this is what I have to do. I've got to prepare. I've got to be ready. I've got to be for real. If you're not going to get up before any group and do a presentation that you're not prepared for, so do your support raising, your MPD, like it's serious. Don't, clock in at 10 a.m. and clock out at 2 p.m. Be serious and treat it with the importance that it has, and people will see that in you when you're making your presentations and having your script prepared and your list prepared and you've prayed it up and you're ready. If you just stumble around and kind of make 3 phone calls, you're never going to get there. So just treat it like you're working overtime. It's the Christmas season, and you're a warehouse worker, and you're just soaking up that overtime. Make that how it is for your support raising.
And I think there's a huge foundation in all this, which we've neglected to say, and it's not because it's not important. It's the most important thing, and that is, again, you need to be spiritually healthy. And so don't sacrifice your time with the Lord in all this. Don't sacrifice your time in Scripture. Everything flows out of your relationship first and foremost with our Creator. And so, Mac, I really appreciate you being on this podcast with me today, but I know this is your heart as well, but I want to make sure we land this real clear in that you can be busy, and you may or may not accomplish some things, but man, it's all for naught if your relationship with Jesus isn't number one in your life. And so there's no excuse to ever put that on the back burner and maybe get back to it after your busy season of work. It's the most important thing. Everything flows out of that. And so keep that foundation of being spiritually healthy first and foremost, and let that help guide your strategy and guide your heart and your mind as you think through and pray through what God would have you do. Don't just listen to the SRS podcasts and feel like you have all the perfect plans, because we want you to lean first and foremost on the Lord. And Mac, I appreciate you and your heart, your friendship, and your willingness to speak about some very practical things, because I know that people worry about, is this possible? Do I have to, we're only at 70%. Does that mean God doesn't want us in the field anymore? And in reality, it is possible to raise support when you're already in the ministry and on the field, but it does take a reset, at least temporarily. Could be weeks, could be months, but it takes a reset. But what I'm hearing is it's possible, and I think that gives a lot of people hope. So I'm going to give you the last word. Anything else that you'd add? Any words of wisdom or thoughts that might be really relevant to someone that's living overseas and they've done their assessment and they're realizing they're short and they're going to have to get started or restarted on their support? Any extra words of wisdom you'd like to throw their way?
Yeah, just say, remember, it is absolutely a spiritual battle. You are doing work for God. The devil doesn't want to see you succeed. He is going to put doubts and fears and hurdles and stumbling blocks before you in this process. Pray it out. Be totally in tune. Have the whole biblical basis of what you're doing. Remind yourself of what your original call is, why you're in the field, why you're doing what you're doing, why your family's making the sacrifices they're making. And if you have all that before you and you're walking with God as you launch out into the season of increased support from the field, or first time massive growth of support from the field, whatever your issue is, that will set you up for success. And you can't halfway it. You have to be full on and know that you're doing it for God and for the right reasons.
Good word. I always respect when somebody comes through a boot camp a second time around. It's kind of like drinking from the fire hose the first time. And just about every boot camp, there's somebody that's been raising living off support for a while, but they kind of want some reset of their training. And sometimes they're coming from overseas. They just got back to the U.S. from wherever it is that they're living and ministering to overseas. And they planned part of their trip to kind of get some retraining so they could jump back into doing some of the things that they need to do in order to get back on the field. And sometimes people will tell me that almost sheepishly, and Instead, I applaud them. I applaud their wisdom of leaning into it instead of avoiding the fact that there's some more work to do in the area of ministry partner development. So, well, Mac, thanks again, my friend. You're a blessing, and your wisdom was wonderful, and I appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thanks, brother. Aaron, love you. Love your ministry. Thanks for what you're doing, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisersolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcasts from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.